Okay, so I'm going to be talking about my view on the theories of comprehension that we went over this week. And first of all, I'm going to talk about what comprehension actually is. So a basic definition of it is comprehension has to do with word recognition, which includes phonological information, auditory information, and can include visual information. And it also includes word and information retrieval, which includes aspects of syntax and semantics. And then lastly, there has to be an integration of the information as well. So what does influence comprehension? I learned this week that everyone comprehends language differently based on a variety of factors that include contextual factors, background knowledge, and ways that the information is presented. That can be auditory or visually or a variety of ways. And I found in our Duke reading this segment that says, meaning does not reside in the oral or written text, rather in our view of comprehension. The listener or reader creates and adjusts a mental representation of the meaning of the text. And I thought that was very fitting for this discussion. And also, without comprehension, reading would be meaningless and empty. There are many cases where students are capable of reading the text and language that's in front of them, but even though that they can read that, they can't comprehend it. So I'm going to be going over the principles that we talked about this week. So in Principle 1, we had 3 different videos to view, and the first was Aristotle. And during this video, it was difficult to concentrate on it because there's auditory distraction present. And then the Insanity video, the goal of this one was to read an article just like the Aristotle video, but instead of an auditory distraction, there's a visual distraction because the screen would kind of flash on and off during it, so that was really distracting, and it was hard for my eyes to keep up with where they were before the screen flashed on and off and where I should continue. And then the last one was a working memory task, and for this task the instructions given said that you should concentrate on the last word that was stated in each sentence, so I pretty much concentrated on only that, and when the questions were asked for the quiz to take after it, I didn't really know much information other than the last words of the sentences. So some factors that were involved in this principle included attention, motivation, background knowledge, and working memory. So just going over these different factors a little bit, background knowledge includes knowledge that links you to what you're reading and what you're comprehending. And then attention, well, that's just what piques your interest and what keeps your attention on the information. And then motivation is why you're engaged in the reading, and if you're more interested in it, then you're more likely to comprehend it better. And then working memory, that's what was involved in the last task in remembering the information that was given. In Principle 2, I compared and contrasted the 2 different versions of the bear and fly story and came up with this chart here that says, in story number 1, I saw poor use of syntax and grammar, and there was also a lack of identifying information, and there were lots of incomplete thoughts. So it was kind of hard to read this passage because it kind of left you trying to guess what information was supposed to be there. And then story 2 brought in a lot of that information that was left out in the first story, and it had sentence structure, descriptive language, it had identifiers like the bear's names, and it also had complete thoughts, where the first story did not always have complete thoughts. And then some factors I felt that were involved with this were attention, motivation, vocabulary, and comprehension. Principle 3 was reading and watching Emma Watson's speech. So my views on this were that it was nice that for the written speech there's a hard copy of the text and the information, and that information could be reread if you wanted to read it for further understanding. But I really enjoyed the video of her live speech a lot better. I found her speech fascinating and inspiring when she was actually giving it, and I had that auditory and that visual of her giving the speech. Emma brought her words to life when she was saying them, because you could hear the passion behind her voice and see her facial expressions while she was talking, and that just added a lot to the speech for me. So factors involved here, I felt that attention, motivation, and background knowledge were included. And then under Principle 4, you were to read and reflect on 2 articles. And the first was about astrophysics, and the second about reading comprehension. So for the first article, it was kind of hard to follow along because I really didn't have much background information on the subject because it's not something that really interests me. But for reading comprehension and that article, I actually had interest in the topics, and also background knowledge, so I could keep up with what the article was saying and I could relate to it in some ways. So I actually wanted to read that article, where the astrophysics I really didn't. And then I have a different way to look at comprehension. From one of the readings for this week, I found this quote that says, "The capabilities and dispositions the reader brings to the task of reading, his or her engagement in and responses to given texts, and the quality of the outcomes produced by the act of reading for some purposes are, themselves, shaped by cultural and subcultural influences, social economic status, home and family background, peer influences, classroom culture, and instructional history." So under this look at comprehension, I found 3 different categories that fall in it, and that's socio-culture influences, inter-individual differences, and intra-individual differences. So under social cultural influences, this is kind of the awareness of how different members of different communities create different identities in the readers in their communities. And then in inter-individual differences, this is kind of the belief in oneself or the lack of the belief, and how that makes a difference in how they feel and how they comprehend themselves as a reader. And then in intra-individual differences, this is a phase of reading development where children are being able to recognize how they read compared to others in their class, and the differences that are seen between them and their peers. And this is where I move on to my theory on reading comprehension. So this is more of a theory based on individuals more than the cognitive side of reading comprehension. So my theory is that motivation is one of the most important factors in comprehension. Self-initiated reading at a young age has the ability to have a huge lasting impact on the individual's overall level of comprehension. Although cognitive factors are important and do play a role in comprehension, in my opinion, more focus should be geared towards sparking interest in children's engage in reading. So what I feel would be best for this theory to actually work in the real world is to work on these 3 factors here. So the first one, giving students choices. Under that, I believe that it's really important to give students choices in regards to literature in a classroom setting, because for some students this may be the only opportunity to get to explore books and the meaning that's really behind the pages, because some students don't have the opportunity to go home and pick out a book to read before bed. So school might be the only time that they actually see this literature. And then if they pick out things that they really enjoy and really are interested in, then that might really spark their interest in reading. And then my second point, providing literature with relevance. For this, I believe that relevance is important, because when it has When literature has relevance to other parts of these students' lives, then a higher level of interest might be seen, as well as this influencing connections to be made in these young readers' minds. So if they can relate what they're reading to their everyday lives, it's a lot more likely that the information is going to kind of stick with them. And then lastly, teacher involvement is a very important part of this process, because like in our one video we watched last week, if the students don't see that their teacher actually cares about how they're doing, then there's really no encouragement for them to do better and do the very best they can. So that's just my view on comprehension.